Welcome everybody to Spice Medicine. This is a two-part course on the medicinal blessings of our most celebrated kitchen and culinary spices and some of the ones that are the most common too. I like to surprise people and show them how some of the herbs, some of the plants that show up for us every day in the kitchen in our favorite dishes are also capable of bringing profound medicine into our lives. So let's get started. First, a little overview for this week. Again, this is lesson one. If you are watching lesson one and lesson two is available, I'll link to it down in the details below. This class, we're going to be exploring the healing power of spices, looking at what spices are, how to select them, how to store them, how to work with them. In part two, we're going to be looking at 12 of my favorite culinary spices and exploring just some of their incredible medicinal and maybe even some of their magical virtues. So let's get started with the definition. What are spices? First of all, spices are plants. They are plants just like the plants that we eat in the kitchen. They're plants just like the medicinal herbs that we work with in herbal medicine, but these plants are set aside and called spices for a few reasons. First and foremost, they are incredibly aromatic. All of the spices that we work with in the kitchen, all of the spices that we call in to flavor our foods and create the dishes that we find special are incredibly aromatic. If they don't smell good, it's not really a reason to add them to food, right? The exception to that might be salt, which is not a plant and technically not a spice, but it is the one substance that doesn't have a strong uh, kind of aroma that we're attracted to, but does find its way into a lot of food. So aroma is very, very important. Where does the aroma come from? Generally from essential oils and volatile oils. So another interesting thing about herbs that are considered spices is they're also the same plants that we generally like to turn into essential oils. They are rich in essential and volatile oils. They are aromatic by nature, which is not only a classifier of the plant itself, but also an energetic in herbal medicine that when a plant is aromatic, it has a strong fragrance that has a stimulating or moving effect on the body. It comes in and moves around. And these are herbs that we like to turn into essential oils because they smell good. They are, of course, flavorful, right? Another main reason why we're adding spices to our food is that they taste good. Now, that handshake between what smells good and what tastes good gets a little bit fuzzy, right? There are definitely spices where it's the scent that we really pick up on the palate as we're eating the food. There are spices where it's the flavor or sometimes the heat or the tongue buzz that we're getting. So it's more of a taste thing, but ultimately they have to smell good and they have to taste good in order for them to be considered spices. They're generally very colorful, very beautiful. They're plants that have developed themselves in a way that attracts our eyes. And in part two, when we talk about cayenne, we'll really get into the ways that plants sort of get humans, human folks, to work for them, and to say it one way. So they're very colorful, they're very attractive, they're sensual. When we see them, we're curious, right? They're not dull. There's something about them that attracts our senses. They are also plants that are consistently steeped in tradition, right? So when we think about the cuisines of specific cultures, of specific traditions, that's wrapped up in specific lore, there's almost always a spice relativity there, right? So, for example, if you think of any cultural cuisine, like if you think of Southeast Asian cuisine or Thai or Mexican, there's spices that immediately come to mind that you're like, oh yeah, what makes that food what it is this particular availability of aromatic, flavorful, spicy herbs. Not necessarily spicy hot, but spicy meaning that they have that strong aromatic property and then the flavor. So Spices also tend to be plants that are very wrapped up in culture. They're very wrapped up in tradition. They are herbs that we bring into the kitchen, and without them, a meal isn't quite right. You know, that if somebody were to try to make khichdi or a curry dish without the cumin, without the turmeric, without the asafoetida, without the coriander, it wouldn't be what it is, right? It would be rice and lentils. So the stories that are around these spices is very, very powerful. I think it's very interesting. And last but not least, this is really going to be our focus in this class this week and in the part two, is that they're herbs that are essential in the kitchen, right? They're the herbs that we want to flavor and to lift up our foods. And many of them are in there simply for the flavor, simply for the aroma. Some of them, as we'll explore in part two, are in there to help with preservation, to help with mitigating the growth of bacteria and mold. So there's a lot of reasons why these particular spices show up in our food, but that's our focus here, is the ones that we call on to create the food that sustains us. So a bit about the value of spices. First of all, throughout history, spices have been elevated to a value asset that rivals opium, silk, gold in some cases, that these are plants that are cherished and revered. And whether the price of them is inflated or real, you know, based on rarity or whatever, they have been valued since time immemorial. In fact, there was even a time not too long ago in the fair city of London where folks could pay rent with black pepper. Black pepper was so valued and so sought after as a spice to bring a meal to life, to mitigate against some of the bacterias and molds that could grow in food, to help with nutrient availability and assimilation, that people could pay, you know, with black pepper as if it were money, as if it were gold. So this is just an attestation to the value of these particular herbs. I would be remiss not to mention Columbus, whose name, you know, I would rather not say, but in this case, let's talk about a little truth telling. In 1492, when the Ottomans had basically blocked uh, their way from getting to any of the Spice Islands of Asia, Christopher Columbus was like, we're going to find a new way around. So he was kind of trying to map his way to get around the Ottoman Empire, to get to the spice-rich islands of Asia and create a more effective trade route for these valuable spices, and ended up landing somewhere quite different. And we all know the insanity that ensued from all of that, which we're now trying to clean up, you know, hundreds of years later. So just a story to acknowledge how important these plants are and how valued they are, how adored they are, and to what degree us human folk are their devotees, right? That especially when it comes to capsicum, the cayenne, which we'll talk about in part two, we have built up cults of devotion around some of these spices. So I think it's really very interesting. Essentials of spice medicine. So just a few things to consider before part two, before we actually get into talking about the plants. These are some things that I would like for you to know. First of all, spice medicine is about consistency and low dosing in the kitchen, meaning we're not really taking heroic doses of ginger. We're not taking mega doses of cinnamon or cumin throughout the day. Rather, these are the herbs that excel when we bring them into our food. They come into our body via nourishment, and it's consistent dosing, low. Why low dosing? Because these herbs are strong, right? The volatile oils are strong, the essential oils are strong, the alkaloids are strong. And when people overdo some of these spice herbs, they can end up overcorrecting and causing more problems than good. So I'm a fan when it comes to spice medicine. Consider this food as medicine. Consider next class when we talk about all the different spices, and there's one or two that stand out to you, rather than thinking, oh, how I'm going to tincture that or get it into a capsule, think, how can I work that creatively into more of my meals? How can I get a little bit of cayenne, into my breakfast, lunch, and dinner? How can I get a little cinnamon into my day throughout the day? And this is where you'll really find the effects of these plants get deep and feel really good, and also bring their blessings of flavor and aroma to your life, which is part of the medicine as well, right? This is organoleptic herbalism, that it's more about the phytochemical reaction of the plant inside of your body, but also the sensual experience of the flavor and the taste and the color and even the feel and the look of some of these really interesting plants. So we want to engage sensually, and the best way to do that is to cook with them. I'll be making dosing suggestions, by the way, as we go through the 12 herbs in the Materia Medica in part 2, and just kind of saying like, shoot for this much, in your meals, and you'll be getting a good therapeutic dose. So for some of the herbs, rare herbs that we do want a higher dose of, for example, a full spectrum turmeric, there are capsules and tinctures and powders. And so, for some of those herbs where the suggested dose is a little higher, you do have some options where you don't have to be eating 3 tablespoons of turmeric a day. Rather, you can get that condensed into a full turmeric product, not a curcumin extract, very not into that. You want the whole turmeric, right? Everything needs to come in with the entourage. So as you are thinking about spices, as you get inspired, especially in part 2 with spices to go purchase and bring into your kitchen, think about quality. This is very, very important. Generally, the spices that you find on grocery store shelves were harvested and dried and powdered, and then it took several months to get them to whoever packaged them. And then once they're packaged, it can take several months for them to get distributed. And then from there, it can take several months for them to end up in the actual grocery store. And then you don't know how long the spice has been sitting on the shelves. Most of them don't have a best by date. So the spices on the grocery store shelf can be anywhere from 6 months to several years old. And this is important because the reason why essential oils and volatile oils are essential and volatile is that it's very easy for them to break down. They go rancid very quickly, or they just break down and evaporate and go away. So I don't know if you've ever had this experience, I certainly have, of buying some beautiful spice from the grocery store in the cute little glass jar, and you get it home and you open it up and it's 20% of what it should be, right? It almost smells more like sawdust than a fresh ground herb. This is an old herb, right? And so if the fragrance, the color, the taste is 20% of what it should be, you can assume the medicine and the magic is 20% of what it should be. So be mindful where you source your spices. Oftentimes local herb shops are going to have a higher quality of spice, a fresh ground spice, versus grocery stores. Or look at specialty markets, or markets, cultural markets like Southeast Asian or Middle Eastern markets, where they're burning through spices faster than standard markets in America. And you are likely to find not only more inexpensive spices, but ones that are fresher, that have had a less amount of time on the shelf because people are buying them faster. So this is good. You can also consider grinding spices fresh at home, buying those turmeric bits, those ginger hands, buying garlic and onions and running those through a food dehydrator and dehydrating them and grinding them on your own as you go. It can be a really beautiful ritual of working with these spice herbs. So that's also something you can consider. Once you have them home, or once you have them ground up, be aware that the surface area of a whole herb, so let's say a whole hand of ginger versus ginger that has been dried and powdered, is billions of times greater. Okay, so once you powder that herb, you are really opening it up to the environment. And so how that spice is stored is crucial. I store my spices in glass, either in dark glass or in a dark cupboard. Keep them away from light. You don't want the herbs to sun bleach. You don't want all of the color to go away. You don't want the aroma to break down. and storing them in metal can sometimes be problematic for some herbs. So I just go straight to glass all the time. You can buy nice glass spice jars, flip top, bale top jars, or just use canning jars, making sure that the spice is lower than the level where it will interact with the metal lid. Very easy. Uh, and darkness is important, as is coolness. You don't want your spices uh, to sit above the stove, right? When I see people with their spice rack above the stove, they're getting hot, hot, heated and cooled, heated and cooled, heated and cooled. It's going to break them down and they're going to just taste like sawdust. So keep them as far away from heat sources, keep them in a nice, cool, dark cabinet, and bring them out ceremoniously when it's time to work with them. And they will preserve their freshness, their flavor, their aroma for much, much longer. So with that, part one is ground to a fine powder. We did it. You know all about spices now. Part two, we are getting into the nitty gritty. We're going to talk about 12 of my favorite culinary spices and their incredible medicinal benefits. Now, if you want more of this content, which way do I point? Over here, you can join us on Patreon. Lots of advanced classes, Q&As, recurring courses, all kinds of fun stuff. There's a link to that in the details below, as there will be a link to part two of this class once it goes live. So I look forward to seeing you in part two, where we will get to know our spice friends even more better.